Spring Creek Model Trains is hitting the road and taking scale signs along for the ride. The signs that bring your models to life can now be found in Deschler, Nebraska, and at nearly 100 train shows throughout the country. Michigan and Texas, you're up. January 17th and 18th, Spring Creek Model Trains will be at the North Texas Council Train Show at the Plano Center in Plano, Texas, and at the Great Train Show at the Suburban Collection Showplace in Novi, Michigan. And to see more of the largest collection of handcrafted scale signs on the planet, head to scalesigns.com. Hey, do you like free stuff? As a member of the operating crew, you'll get a chance to win awesome prizes each month. For less than a dime a day, you'll be entered to win, and just as important, your support helps keep every episode from behind a paywall and free of those unrelated and annoying commercials you hear on other podcasts. Sign up today at aroundthelayout.com/crew, and thank you for your support. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com.
ATLP Rewind.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. It's time for Talking Ops with Don Irace, and it wouldn't be the right title of the show without Don Irace. Welcome back, Don.
Hello there, everybody. Ray, hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving holiday.
Yeah, I had a pretty good one. Quiet, which was kind of nice, but I also got to mix in a little bit of, I actually found a layout in my basement. I don't know,
Really?
it was hidden for a while, and I actually got down there, and although I really worked on the diorama for the shows, and I took your good advice of putting a signal on that diorama so it justifies a train sitting idle. So I had a little fun doing that, wiring that up, and got the switch in the back so I can play with it and change the aspects. I don't know why, just because I can, and I have a little bit of play aspect to it.
Yeah, it looks a lot better that way than nothing there at all. It gives the train, the engine, a reason to stand hard on the diorama. So
Yeah,
just as long as the
definitely.
train, I just don't know how the train, when it comes the other way, is gonna make that jump.
Yeah, and that's why I sent you a picture of the signal red, and I said, "Stop, end of world, don't go any farther." But yeah, it definitely, it's a good eye catcher at train shows. It's fun to talk about it. Of course, Joe Mame and I together built it, so we had a lot of fun doing that together. And we'll be heading to the Hub Show. Actually, by the time this airs, I think the Hub Show will already be over. So we had an awesome time, Don.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. It's always been a good time. Every time I went there, I enjoyed that show a lot.
Yeah, that's a good one. So
Yeah.
tell us about your Thanksgiving. How'd that go?
This year was busy. We had, like, my father's here. He's been here since October, so he spent the holiday with us, and we've been getting some work done. And I got some work done around the house I need to get done, pull some stumps out and all that stuff. But mostly he just wants to be in the train room. We're running trains every day, and he's been he went on a couple of scenery missions, putting some weed patches down around all over the place, so we enjoyed doing that. We give him the boxes of tufts and some glue and a tweezer, and off to town he goes. But we just been spending a lot of time running trains a lot.
I guess that's a good way to get your tufts down randomly. Let somebody else do it, and then it looks random to you, right?
Yeah, it works all good. He put one. I try to keep him out from between the rail, especially on the main, but he threw one down in the yard, and I was running my little my track car today, and made a video, and I noticed when it was coming through the yard, it hit that tuft. It didn't stop it; it went over it, but you could see it was definitely not liking that tuft. So I'm gonna have to get the shears out and trim that puppy down a little bit.
There you go. Do a little weed whacking on the tufts, get
yeah.
them knocked down. But
I gotta call up somebody, get a mini weed whacker and HO scale.
There you go.
If I use mine, I'll wipe everything out.
That's right. Yeah, don't use it in the shed. So,
but it was a good Thanksgiving. I'm glad my father was here. It's been really nice to have him here.
Absolutely. It's been a lot of fun seeing you guys working, running trains, like I've said, and it's great to follow your updates. And again, we'll share that link again in our show notes, aroundthelayout.com/135. But we're here to talk more than just Thanksgiving. We're actually here to talk about a guy who didn't celebrate it at all because he's in Sydney, Australia. We know him as the executive producer, but tonight he's going to be talking about his Riverbelt line and operations on that, Mr. Paul Cassar. Paul, good to see you, my friend.
How are you both? Good to see you both as well.
Good evening, Paul.
Hey, Don.
Yeah, it's been good to get you back on here. We just had you on the Rewind, and we were able to hear a little bit about your Riverbelt line and some updates that you had provided at that point. It's been over a year. Just time's just clicking on by of the episodes, fast. And yeah, it's way too fast. But glad to have you back on here. We're going to talk more about ops and what you got going on your Riverbelt line, and you kind of given us a little bit of a preview of some of those things, and looking forward to talking about everything you do on that layout.
Yeah, well, I think for me with operating, it's more about part prototypical, but also getting enjoyment out of operations and trying to be as prototypical as possible on what restrictions you have on your layout. And also, I'm pretty passionate about using switchlist. I know I have a switchlist program, and I know Don does his own switchlist on Excel. So it'd be good to discuss the differences on how we operate and how different switchlist programs also change the way you operate. So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to discussing tonight.
Yeah, well, the difference between my switch list and your switch list is yours self-generate, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, see, mine don't. I'm the self-generator when it comes to my switch list.
Which is fundamental, what I wanted to talk about. So maybe if I talk about how I operate first,
okay,
yeah,
or how the layout's designed. So the Riverbelt line is a industrial railroad, but it's a little bit different. It has the Riverbelt Railroad itself that has a number of contracts that it delivers boxcars, tank cars, and the like to the brewery and to other places on the Riverbelt. But it also has 3 interchanges. It interchanges with Norfolk and Western, Mopac, and Missouri, Kansas, Texas. So the way I've designed the ladder, or the way I design operations, is that those 3 railroads have their own trains, which have different contracts to deliver different commodities to different industries on the Riverbelt line. So the way I've set up the switch list is that Norfolk Western have a contract to deliver most boxcars to the industries. MKT does more hoppers, and Missouri Pacific does reefers. So different cars come with the different trains. Now, the Riverbelt line has round about 28 spots to drop cars. So for a layout that's 18 feet by 16 feet, has quite a lot of industrial spurs. One of the learnings from Lance Mindham, of course, is that one spur can have 3 or 4 spots on that spur, and each boxcar or tank car or hopper is required to go to an individual spot. So the switch list that I use has the capability, one, to allocate to an industry, but also to a spot on that industry. And then you can decide on whether or not that spot unloads in a day, 2 or 3 days. So what that means is that any operating session, so I have 4 local trains, of course, now. I have the Riverbelt, MKT, Norfolk Western, and Mopac. There's a variable around the spots because some cars clear in a day, some cars clear in 3, which means that every operating session is always different. And that's the difference is, even though it's, as you said, Don, that it's random, it's random to a point on how you set up the switch list to operate. So I have different cars coming in onto the layout and then different cars coming off the interchange. So the layout would hold possibly 50 cars, but I have a roster of about 180 cars that cycle through at different random points of time, if that makes sense.
Sure. So the Riverbelt owns their own trackage, and these other railroads have trackage rights over the Riverbelt? Okay.
That's correct. That's correct. And then, as I said, different locals have different consists. So as I said, for instance, MKT has a lot of hoppers coming off the interchange, and it services the grain terminal at the brewery. I also have an export grain terminal and a food grain terminal. So I have three grain terminals on the layout, and it drops off different types of cars, both 4700 type hoppers and also PS2s, that it drops off to different grain terminals for different purposes. So it's a mix. It mixes a lot of different operating styles, which then changes, depends on the length of the train, how I operate. So some you will pick up only and then go back to the interchange or to a classification yard and drop off cars, and then pick off cars waiting at the interchange to go back to the industry. Depends on the loading of the industry. But what I usually try and do is when I have the switch list, I work out a switching plan. So in a lot of cases, I will pick up and drop off at an industry and then go back to the interchange or a classification yard and drop those cars off and go back out and pick up other industries. So I like the randomness, not randomless, whatever. I like how it operates randomly, randomly, that not every session's the same. And I guess my question back to you on your layout is, if you're creating your own switch list, is the pattern always the same?
No, it's not the same. There's three different cycles in my switch lists. So the cycles are basically determined on the coal hopper cars. So I have 3 sets of 6 of coal hoppers. So whatever coal hoppers are coming out of the CSX yard into Worcester is which switch list I use. All right. And then I don't, like you have those colored toolboxes that you put your offline stuff in. I use all the same rolling stock. So whatever goes back to the yard gets remade up and brought back into Worcester on the next session. Because I've found, and I've said this before, that we operate once a week. With 3 cycles of trains, the guys are they never really figure out that they're switching. That car's been here 3 weeks ago. You know what I mean? They just, because they're in the moment of the op session and not really paying attention. They got a switch list, they got card numbers. They just, that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing tonight. They don't care what they did last week, or the week after that, or week before that, or blah, blah, blah. So that's, plus I don't need any more rolling stock in here than I need. So.
Yeah, and I think we've determined that over quite a few conversations, both on here on the podcast and even offline, regarding, spare cars. And it's certainly fine to do, but just understand the person you're doing it for is yourself. Because again, most operators, unless you have those odd looking cars, like the pink F-box breast cancer car, or something with very specific graffiti on it or whatever, guys aren't going to really notice between one CN car to the next CN car or the next F-box to the next F-box. To just, it's likely just, it's for you. So just, knowing that, and there's certainly nothing wrong with it. And I certainly like to see things change and shake up too, but operators don't notice it.
No, I mean, like my Center depressed tank cars, I got 2 of them and they're both the same road number. But because there's only a buffer car, a Center depressed car, and a caboose on the train, they're not even looking at the number. Switch list says they're going to set this Center depressed car up in Valley Falls. That's what they're looking at. They're not even looking at what the car number is. There's only one car to deal with, Yep. So, but we're here to talk about Paul. So let's.
I think you brought up a point which I didn't talk about. Is I do have storage boxes for the West Line classification yard. So the classification yard probably holds 15, 18 cars, but then I have a storage box that'll hold another 30. The Norfolk Western interchange, the same. The actual interchange holds 8 cars, but I've got storage facilities for about 30 or 40. The Southwest interchange, the Southwest yard probably can hold 50 on the yard. No, holds around 25 on the yard, and I hold another 60 in the storage box. And MKT and Mopac both hold around 30 or 40 cars each. So cars are coming in and off the layout out of those storage boxes. So you don't have to have a massive yard if you don't have the space, you just have a yard with a couple of roads, and then cars come on and off as required by the switch list. And that enables me to cycle a lot through. So because I'm in a way a lone wolf, I do operate most of the time by myself.
Right.
It does change. I'm not doing the same thing every operation session. So each local train takes around an hour and a half to operate using a proto throttle. Used to be under an hour. The proto throttle easily adds around 50% additional time. And by doing that, it enables me to cycle through 4 trains. Takes around about 6 to 8 hours. So I do one session on a weekend on a Sunday afternoon. Around about 4 weeks, I finish the 4 switch lists, and then on the program, I hit complete for each train. I hit one button, and it generates 4 trains for the next lot of switch lists on it, and a number of reports, so I can always see what cars are where. But I never operate the layout without the switch list. So it's always ready to operate if I have people show. And I have had a number of people come and operate. And then what I tend to do is I sit back, I let them operate, and then I take feedback from them on how the sessions can be improved. Because when you do it yourself, you become so familiar with it that you don't necessarily need the information that others who don't operate do need. And I've had recently I had 3 people come and operate. We actually switched 2 trains consecutively, and I got some really good feedback. What I will say also about having rolling stock on and off the layout, models like Intermountain and Rapido with super detail are not your friend. handling rolling stock, there's bits and pieces I see on the layout.
That's why I don't do that, because I don't handle the home shops costs I got. I don't want to touch them because I don't want to break nothing off,
Yeah, and then you get a tank car and you look at the tank cars too hard and they'll fall apart. The details break off. So yeah, you definitely want to be careful with that concept. I want to walk back a little bit here, Paul, because I wrote down this. You have 4 locals, and this whole concept of riverbelt lines, and then bringing in 3 different railroads, the N&W, Mopac, and MKT. Where did that develop from, and kind of explore your why as to, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to do N&W, or I'm going to do Mopac, or I'm going to do MKT, you've created this freelanced, overall line name, and then brought those 3 in. Talk about that theory and why you did that and how it relates to your operations.
Yeah, quite interesting. When I got back in the hobby back in '96, N scale, I first modeled Union Pacific. And after a while, I realized that everybody had Union Pacific. So I decided to model fallen flags of Union Pacific. And then I loved Mopac. So the layout changed from Union Pacific to Mopac. And then I like Southern Pacific and MKT and, all the 80s type of railroads. So when I moved and went to HO, I wanted to keep those fallen flags involved somehow in the layout. But I also like the idea of proto freelancing, having my own railroad, but keeping it realistic enough that it's plausible that it would happen in the prototype. So the Riverbelt line is not it's not a class 1, it's probably a class 3 railroad with older locomotives that are just either patched out and a Riverbelt emblem put on. Now, call myself lazy. I didn't want to totally respray locomotives and go to that extent of building my own prototype of freelance locomotive. So I would pick a Norfolk Western or a Missouri Pacific loco, patch out, and put a Riverbelt line patch on it. So it sort of blends in. The Riverbelt locos are mainly Alcos now, or I do have I think 1 EMD, and the Norfolk Westerns is a number of EMD and Alcos. MKT is EMDs, and the Mopac I've got couple of GP 38s, and 2 Alco RS3. So I sort of, what I like, I implement onto the railroad. So I find it a good mix. I sold off a lot of my EMD collection and put in the Alcos. And I like the fact that I can have a riverbelt train with a number of riverbelt cars along with prototypical cars. So I find that as a pretty good mix for operating. And I still allows me to do a bit of custom painting when I feel like it. I've recently custom painted 2 box cars as riverbelt, but their reporting marks are my grandchildren's names and their birth dates on the cars. So, just a little bit of personal touch. And a few people know that I'm considering an exhibition layout long term. And what I would like to do is an exhibition riverbelt line layout, shelf layout, to really show people how you can build a small shelf layout and prototypically operate with a proto throttle. So I'll just be using the same rolling stock and possibly build some structures on a small cut down version of the riverbelt line, because I've sort of built that brand name over the last few years, and I want to continue that.
Well, it seems like that whole riverbelt line theory and then adding those 3 railroads have also helped you on the operations side. And what you were describing seems to bring up the number of trains that you're able to run or try to justify on your layout as well.
100%. And that was the reason why I did it. I wanted to have my own, but I also wanted the railroads that I really like. And I really only recently took to liking of Norfolk Western, probably the last 3 or 4 years. Hence, I have a number of Norfolk Western locomotives. Norfolk Southern, which of course are the predecessor of Norfolk Western, probably a little bit too modern for me. I wanted to stay around the 80s and 90s. So Norfolk Western really fitted into that. And of course, MKT and Mopac.
How many GEs you got?
Yeah, good question. 0. I love the C30s. I've always, but I need a B, I think, because the C30 is a 6-axle, and I limit the layout to 4-axle locomotives. But there maybe a GE in the future. We'll see what's around.
I got one 6-axle CSX unit, and I'm about ready to heave it. It's like them things are like, oh my God. They get into my yard switches, and there's one track that just gets down on a curve over there, and the front wheels just come lifted right off the ground. I'm like, what is it with this thing?
Yeah, 6-axles, you really need long switches and
I agree.
Big radius curves, and I just don't have that benefit. And most industrial railroads, I would say, were 4-axle up until probably the last 10 years, where they're running out of 4-axle and they're using some of their big 6-axle stuff, out there.
You go back to the class. Would you said class 3, usually measured in track miles. Would you more consider it maybe a regional or a short line, maybe?
Probably short line. It's more a short line. Doing an industrial area. And what I like about that is it enables you then to, don't necessarily need to have motorized turnouts, switches on the layout.
No, absolutely.
It's all manual operation, not even train order, just one train on the line. And being a signaling engineer, I try and stay away from all that stuff. I do have some level crossings on the layout, but no signals. People say, well,
I like signals because they're just, to me, I mean, the PNW is dark territory. They never had signals, but I just like the looks of the signals and everything. So, I mean, that's with it's proto freelance, so I can do whatever I want to do, and then to have
you got a large layout. You've got plenty of block sections you can create.
Oh yeah, I just added 2 more and put signal. I put a signal on the helix because we had an op session where we had a train waiting at the paper mill to leave, and he couldn't come out because there's another train sitting at the signal on the bottom waiting to go. So John Farrington, he says, so if you put a signal up halfway up the helix, he says, we got to eliminate all this. I'm like, why didn't I think of that? So that's what I did. If you look behind me, I don't know if you can see it. It's like right there.
Well, we're an audio podcast. I don't know if I'm going to remind you of this, Don, but yeah. So let me add some color to folks. Don's sitting in front of his Helix in the shed, and he's pointing behind him because he can't remember that we're an audio podcast. But yeah, nonetheless, that was great to see. Yeah, that was a great idea to put signals, and you tuck them in nice and neat inside your Helix. And but Don, if you were a signal engineer for a living, you may not want to do so many signals as Paul is indicating here.
I don't know. I just got this fetish with having signals. When I originally built this route, I wasn't going to put signals at all. Then we got Mark wanted to dispatch it, and and I said, well, you can't dispatch it without signals. I mean, we dispatched Tony's layout for years with no signals, But I just I had a whole box of signals for my old layout, so I just so we're just going to use them. That's it.
And look, I totally understand people want to install signaling, CTC, and all this type of stuff, and some are fantastic. They should be doing prototype signaling, really. But just for me personally, I just like doing manual operation. Having said that, maybe one day I may put a couple of block signals in. We'll see. But I've got no turnouts that are motorized. For me, it's about reliable operation. And because it's a switching layouts to me is all manual throw over points. In industrial siding, very rarely would you have motor points unless it's heavily off the main line. A industrial short line would have very little signaling gear. That's all costly. You got to maintain it.
You should get, just for the folks out there, what is your actual dimensions of your layout so they get an idea if they haven't heard of it before?
So it's roughly on two walls, L-shaped, 18 feet by around 16 feet. With it's got a lift bridge on a 16-foot section, and it comes out round about 24 inches to 30 inches. So not real deep, and that was a lessons learned. I've got one section that's quite deep. If you're doing a shelf layout, I think 2 feet's probably the maximum you should aim for. And it sits around 50 inches high. So I was lucky. I had my layout designed by, he went by the name of MC Fujiwara in the USA, and he was on a lot of forums and did a great design, but I've never been able to contact him since because I think that was a pseudonym. But one thing I did have was I had my layout design reviewed by Lance Mindham, who I just sent him an email once with my layout, and he gave me some feedback, which I think most people would know was remove track and have, that's Lance's.
Exactly.
And also having open space, which I've kept a section open. But I do like the very busy industrial scene as well. So horses for courses, once again, on an industrial layout, you expect to see a lot of buildings and scrap here and there, and not a lot of open space compared to a large layout like yourself, where you can have areas that are very open coming into yards and into industrial spurs. Modeler's license, I guess. I do like. I think mine's right. I don't need any more. I wouldn't expand it. You just have to draw the line on. It's at space versus operational flexibility, and I'm quite happy with the amount of operational flexibility I have on the layout.
Could you expand it if you wanted to?
No. I've got shelving down the last wall, and I've got 2 cars in the garage. It's just enough now. And if I could, I wouldn't. I don't think I need any larger. I like to super detail areas. I've still got a way to go on that. So no, I'm quite happy with 18 by 16. I think it's large enough for one person to operate.
That is quite a challenge, though, isn't it? When you have a small switching layout, I have one that not making it more than what it should be. You built a small switching layout because you didn't have the room or because you wanted something smaller, but the temptation to just continuously jam it up with more industries and more actions and make it more than what it can be or what it should be, That must be tough to tell yourself no.
It's a challenge, and we're all modelers, and we all like to build, and we all like to, get the maximum. I think that you need to come up with a design that's practical. Some of mine, yes, probably some of the purists would say there's too much industry for the area, but that does present challenges where you've got a train that's 14 cars and you've got a run around that takes 10. So then you need to start to think of how you're going to switch that train, where you're going to off-spot cars, that type of thing. So it is mentally challenging, and I think that helps you maintain interest rather than if you were to, I guess, just put tracks all over the place.
Let's talk about industry selection. How did you choose the industries you have on your layout, and why? And was it operations-based choosing of what industry you were going to represent on that layout?
The design parameters was always around switching and operating. So when we started to and throwing with MC about what I wanted, he suggested a brewery with a grain terminal as the basis of the layout. And the brewery itself has a receiving spur, a distribution spur, and then it also has receives corn syrup, and also it loads beer tank cars. So that was the real crux of it. And then off that, we built a number of industries that either support the brewery or are individual and have nothing to do with the brewery. So there's a printing industry that delivers labels to the brewery via boxcar. There's a cold storage facility that can take cold storage from the brewery, but also there's a food processing plant that also interchanges with the cold storage and also the brewery. So some are interlinked. But what I also do, just to make things a little bit more interesting, is interchange to interchange. So there'll be some cars that go from Mopac interchange, the Mopac South interchange, to Norfolk Western. So those cars are just travelling through the layout, but just add that additional, allows cars to flow through the layout off and on, and then between MKT and Mopac as well. So you build what you want in the switch list, but it's a balancing act, because what you need to do with the switch list is ensure that there's not so many cars that you've got too many on the layout, or too little that you overflow your storage. So
Right.
you're always tweaking now and then different industries and different cars. And then, you might get a nice box car from Home Shops, or a around the layout podcast car that you custom paint, that need to be integrated in the layout. So then it's balancing that as well.
What about your offline industry? Do you have specific offline industry, actual industries?
No, good question. So no, I don't. You can do that, but what I do is I just have a box car, a load that goes from the brewery to the MKT interchange. And so it just gets sent to MKT interchange, comes off, and then it's called back when that industry requires that similar load to be picked up or dropped off.
So the stuff that goes into the toolbox that you put in there is not actually going to another industry. It's just waiting to be retrieved to get back onto the layout again.
That's correct. That's correct. So it'll send it might be the brewery sends a car to MKT, and it might be a loaded beer, and then I have that set to offload in three days. So it'll sit there for at least 3 operating sessions, if not more, depending on how it's cycling through. There's other industries that might need 4 box cars every day. So every operating session, there's 4 box cars being loaded, 4 being unloaded.
All right. So So as far as your switch list goes, at the end of your cycle or however you end it, and it makes a new set of switch lists, now you physically have to go and take the cars off the layout, put them in the boxes, and then take cars out of the boxes that's on the switch list and put them in play. Okay. So you've got some restaging to do between your observations.
So what I do is, at the end of an operating session, there's cars on the interchanges which have been dropped off by that train.
Mhm.
I take those cars off, put them into storage. I pull the next switch list and I load off the storage boxes onto the interchanges.
By
and
car number.
By car number.
By the car number, it's on the switch list that was
Yeah, that's
generated.
correct.
Okay, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, okay.
Every car, every individual car number. Now there is a little
Right.
trick I've learned for car numbers where you've got multiple car numbers. You don't want to be applying decals and decaling all these cars. So what I would do is if I got two cars, let's just say car number 1, 2, 3, 4, and I've got 3 of those cars. So one would stay original, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd patch out on the next car number 1. So that car number is 2, 3, 4. And the third car, I'd patch out number 4. So its car number is 1, 2, 3. So there's 3 cars with the same number that I've been able to patch out without having to do major.
I do the same thing.
Yeah.
I got multiple. When I bought my ethanol cars, there was only so many numbers of the cars, and I had 12 of them. And most of them, I probably had, some of them I had 3 of the same car number, some I had 2 of the same car number, and all I did was just take one number off one end of the other. And it's funny because when I make out my switch list and I start punching in that number, it wants to push. If it sees a number close to that on the Excel sheet, it fills it right in. And if I don't catch it, I end up printing it like that. Then the guys go, "Oh, how come you got 2 of the same car numbers here?" I'm like, "Oops."
Yeah.
So now I have to pay more attention to that. That doesn't happen.
It's a good little tip for anybody with multiple cars, and when you're operating, if you want to separate that out. And yeah, so the switch list has the details of every car, and that's what I will say is that anyone who wants to use a switch list program. Now I use a Mac-based one called Switchlist, and it's free. But those who use JMRI have a similar challenge, is setting up the database first.
Right.
Once you set it up and put all the cars in and the car numbers and the length of the car, and then you set up the industries, then it starts to flow. But it does take a bit of practice to get the switch list operating the way you do. The program I use also has the length of the spur so that it knows how many cars to allocate in each session. And if there's too many cars due, it will tell you that the car's been left in a certain place because it's unable to be received at the certain industry. And that adds a little bit more of operating variability. What I also do with the yard, so the yard, I'll just say it's 10,000 feet. There's no limit, so that as cars get sent back to the classification yard, once it's full, I just take them off and put them in the storage boxes, and that works quite well as well, because what it does is, because it's variable, sometimes there's a number of box cars on the layout that are no longer being serviced to industries, so the switch list sends them back to its home classification yard. So I have 2. I have the West Belt classification yard and I have the Southwest classification yard. So cars that are no longer required are sent back to the classification yards until required later on in a number of operating sessions.
So do you have any yard operations on your layout?
What I do is cars are dropped off back to the classification yard. So after I switch the layout, those cars are then dropped off into the class yard. But I have 2 or 3 classification sidings, and I have one that outbound cars from the classification yard are set up in there. So I set them up manually and then switch cars in and out as required.
So you don't have an actual yard master anywhere, any yard master job somebody just puts together and takes apart trains?
No, it's not big enough for that. I could, in a way, I could switch the classification yard separately to prep the cars due to come out of the classification yard, but I have enough switching to do.
Yeah. So if you had 6 model railroaders living down the street from you to come to your house on a weekly basis, would you be able to have a full-time yard master working in a yard? I just say yard.
I think I could, but I would also have I'd operate 2 trains with 2 people on each train, so I could quite easily have 4 or 5 people on the layout.
So on the average, when after your sessions are over, what is the length of time it takes you to restage once you get those new switch lists pumped out?
5 minutes.
Oh, that's not bad. So how many cars
Yeah.
you were actually changing,
About
taking off, putting on?
there'd probably be 10 to 15 cars
Oh, I thought it was more than that.
coming off and on, because some cars are switched between industries.
Mm.
So the average switch list is around 25 cars per operating session, and out of that, probably 10 or 15 are coming off the layout, going on, and then there's another 10 or 15 being put on the next switch list.
Yeah, because you have industry, you go from industry to industry. Because you have the brewery. We know
Yes.
this because you just answered this question on our last episode where we were talking about model railroad industries with Kevin Tully, that you have support for the brewery. So all these things that you talked about, all the commodities that go to the brewery, some of those industries exist on your layout. So that car isn't coming off yet because it's gone to that industry. Then it'll go over here. Then it'll come. Yeah. So it's got multiple movements before it comes off. So you got quite a few cars on your layout, but not so many coming off.
Yeah. And that can be challenging because what you tend to do is pick up all your cars knowing that they're going to go to an interchange or into a yard. And then halfway through, you check your list, you think, that box car's actually got to go place I just been. So it's good to read the switch list, and I look for those ones that are within industry to industry, and then block the train for ones that go into the yard or into an interchange. And the interchanges are based at the extremities of the layout, and there's a main runaround on each basically wall. So you need to plan on where you're going to run around and drop which cars off and pick up at what part of the layout, which is all part of the game, right? It's all about that mental challenge, because anybody can drop and pick up cars, but in prototype, it's about doing it as efficient as possible and making sure that you're not going end to end with one car each time. You want to actually set your train up to drop cars off in one direction, head down the other end, run around, pick up cars, drop off cars down the what I'll call the western end of layout, and then head back east. So it's all about efficiency as well.
I only have one industry, actually two that feed. So it's got to do with the paper mill and a paper company that's up in Pawtucket. So what happens on mine is the boxcar that comes out of Inland Paper will get brought back to Worcester, and then the interchange between Worcester and Valley Falls will take that car up to Valley Falls, and then that'll get put on the local that goes to Pawtucket. And the car that comes out of that business goes back to Worcester, and then it gets shoved over to the train for the paper mill. So that's the only place where I have industries that interchange, just the two, the paper mill and that one box company. That's the only two I have to deal with. And I tell you what, sometimes if I'm not paying attention to that switch list when I'm making up the new ones, I totally lose track of what I have to go back to the old switch list to see what car came out of there, so I know what's going back to the paper mill. I mean, so it's a little hairy sometimes.
The advantage of having a switch list program is, well, certainly the one I have, is it has a number of reports. So I can print a report and it tells me where every car should be, either on the layout or off layout. Or it'll tell me, I can print a report about all the industries and the usage, how much usage is being generated. And it also provides a report of suggested cargoes I can be shipping around the layout. But what I do like is, in particular, is, as some people would know, I custom painted my own Around the Layout podcast boxcar.
Yes,
it's interesting to watch that because it's individual. You'll see it go to different parts of the layout and come off and then come back on. So you get to see how a car is cycled in a railroad and how it goes, all over the place. You're running more like a unit train type of operation on your layout where, 6-car coal cars are going to a certain point unloaded and they go back to another place loaded, right?
Right. So what happens? What happens is as far as the coal cars go, they leave They come off the CSX empty, and they go into Worcester. Then they get put on WOPR, brought up to Valley Falls, while they're doing the interchange, and then once they set out the new cars for PR2 and PR3, they go back and pick up the 6 hoppers, and they go down to the Port of Providence, and they pull the loads off the Spirit, and they put the empties on the Spirit, then take the loads back to Worcester, Valley Falls. They pick up the outbounds from Valley Falls to Worcester, and they bring that whole, I think it's like 16-car train back to Worcester. And then those cars, when they come back, they get brought back to the CSX, and then the cycle starts all over again. So there's 3 different cycles that I use. It works out good for me.
Well, I think what Paul may have been referring to is more like just a unit versus what we can tend to do with a single box car, which is put it in this dedicated service and model railroading operations, where in reality that car goes to a pool, right? Okay. It may run, a certain commodity, and then it's not going to go all the way back. It's certainly not going to return all the way across the country empty. It's going to go to a pool that's going to reload it with a totally different commodity to go somewhere else. And you may or may never see that car again. Unfortunately, unless you want to buy another 20 or 30 toolboxes and store cars in them, it's really hard to emulate that.
You're running out of colors.
Yeah, you definitely run out of a lot of things, right? So, but yeah, I get that idea, but
I think it does replicate that, Ray. I think it does show you, when you have cars coming on and off and going to different industries, how a box car goes, all over the place. And you can replicate that just on a small shelf layout. It would be difficult for me to run unit trains because of the size of the layout. I could have 3 or 4 cars, maybe one unit goes to the scrap metal, but that's not really how they operate for industry, for small industries. When they've got a box car available, they set it out, load it up, and ship it out. And it's interesting because the randomness of the program is sometimes you'll get cars that sit in the store box for weeks and months, and you think, oh, is there something wrong with the program? And the next thing you know, next operating session, it's called to go to an industry. So
I tried to use that JMRI switchless. I think just make me dizzy. I'm like, listen, I can make up my own switch list, and I have 7 switch lists, and I can refabricate that switch list in probably half an hour, 30 minutes, all done, changing everything. It'll print it out back on the clipboards. So, and the JMI one is okay, but it's just way more information than I feel like putting in it.
Let me ask you this, Paul, because I'll use a term that I've learned from you. You're really keen being one of your words. You're really keen on switch lists. Have you always used switch lists, or is this something that you've learned along the way? How did you get this, involved? And then of course, how did you, get into the program you use now?
Definitely from what I saw online, I learned. I found that before I had a switch list, you were just moving cars, and I didn't have a lot of interest in just switching for the sake of switching. I needed to have purpose, and I'm not even sure how I came across this Mac version. It's done by Rob Bowditch, who was an Apple programmer who lived in San Francisco, and Rob's heavily involved in the NMRA as well over on the West Coast, USA, and he gave it out free, and I just saw it and started to play around with it, and I realized the benefits but as I said, once you've got to learn it, but once I did, I just found it's another hobby within a hobby. That sounds familiar, Ray?
Yeah, it does.
And I can spend nights just playing around with switch lists. So what I do is I have my main file, that's the operating file, but sometimes I'll take a copy of that and make changes and play around and see how that changes the switch list. And it's taught me a lot. And we're further, the only downside is that Rob doesn't have a lot of time, and there hasn't been a lot of updates to it. So it doesn't get a lot of new functionality, whereas JMRI does. But JMRI is quite complex, and sometimes that, like as Don was saying, it turns you off from using it.
Absolutely. And what kind of improvements would you like to see to that program? Just if I can ask.
Things around being able to off spot cars, that it would actually off spot to a point rather than say not available. So then you look for an off spot. So things like that. Not a lot. I actually like it. I don't really need anything more. It does everything that I need to do.
So would you have to create offline industries in order to shove? It's like, say your drawer number one in your box is some feed company. Couldn't you just tell the software to send that car to that third drawer in your toolbox as a feed company?
You could just show where the car is. What it tends to do is it leaves the car at its departure spot until it knows the next session that it's able to send the car because it's cleared out that industry. So otherwise you could. Most people, when they operate, they would just off spot it themselves. And I have done what I have done though in the past is, if I've got an industry taking a lot of cars, I will take the excess cars and put it into a storage box, just myself. Take it off, so it's allow more cars to go into that industry. But I try and set the industries to only take what they can, so I don't have to take them off layout.
All right. So how many industries do you have on your layout?
I have 9 industries. Actually, make that 10 industries, but then I would have around 27 spots on the layout. So some industries have 3 or 4 spotting spots or doors, or like I have a Ciccone food processing plant, which is one spur. It has one spot, but next to it has a grain silo that takes hoppers as well. And that was the other point I was going to say, which is a good reminder, is that because I have so many spots, you might have one train in one operating session drop off a box car to a spot, and then the next train, the next local comes along and it's got a spot behind that spot that it needs to drop off a reefer. So then what you need to do is pull out that box car to drop off the reefer and then put the box car back. So that can increase the amount of operating requirements by another 50% and that happens quite regularly, where I'll have reefers who are dropped off by the Riverbelt line, and then the Mopac train comes with a box car that's spotted behind those reefers. So then that Mopac has to pull the reefers out, drop the box car, then relocate the reefers back. And that happens for a number of industries. So that adds another layer of complexity when you think about four local trains that are dropping off cars either in front or behind existing cars that were dropped off by other local trains.
So are they numbered? Are they numbered like car spot 1, 2, or 3 on the switch list, so they know? Because that's not something odd. A lot of people do that. I think I have one. I have a couple of. Well, my chemical company, for one, has 8 tank cars in there, and when they come up there, and they only come up there with 3, so there's 3 out, 3 in, and they have to shuffle the cars around per the switch list for the industry itself. So it's like, I understand what you're saying, and to me, that adds to the operation and makes it last longer, especially if you have a crew and you're trying to make the session last. That's perfect for that kind of situation.
Well, I think as you get more experience, you want to challenge yourself more. I think if you're first starting operating, you may just drop cars off into a spur, into an industry. But I think once you become more experienced, my switch list has allocated door numbers,
right?
And then you must drop off those cars to the allocated doors. Which, if you look at my my fast print industry, it has 3 doors and different box cars allocated to doors. So when you're setting in, then you realise that I've got to drop this car. one car off to door 3, another car to door 2, and another car to door 1, and there's already cars in that industry, you have to then reblock those cars and then pull the other cars out and drop the cars off and back in order. That takes time.
Yeah, this reminds me of one layout that this is what happens there. Mark Herrick's BNSF in Columbia Falls. That up there is a switching puzzle in itself. He's got lines of tracks for the plywood companies. There's probably 3 or 4 cars on there, and then you have to go. And he uses car cards, so he can.
Yeah.
He basically goes ahead and tells you what cars are coming out. And it could be the one in the middle. It could be all the way down on the end. And then you pull the one on the end out and you got to mix them all up to get them in there. But you can, a guy takes that job on, he's there all night. I don't care who it is. I've seen guys finish it and I've seen guys not finish it. It's a nice place to bury a guy.
And it comes down to experience, right, of the operator and how well they know it. For me, because it's end to end, you have to know where to place your cars, where you're going to run around, how many cars you can run around, and as I said, what's the most efficient way to do it in the shortest amount of time. Now, I know that it's not a race, and I like nothing more than just relaxing, going onto the layout and operating. But it's about not just I'll just throw the car in there and it's done. It's about placing the car in, placing your other cars around it in the most efficient way. For me, that's the challenge.
Right.
It's and it get caught if you're not. Nothing worse that you get the end of the switch and say, hang on a minute, what's this boxcar still doing on the back of the train? Oh, hell, it's going to go all the way back down to the other end and I've got to run around and set it back in. But I'm sure that happens prototypically too. I'm sure they've probably brought a boxcar back too many or left a boxcar in an off spot and gone back to the yard and someone said, well, where's that car? Oh, yeah, it's back
that'll
there.
mess up the schedule. That's for sure. That's going to make the phone ring.
Well, I know of a local railroad that you would go by an industry because they just didn't feel like stopping there. And they would keep the car on and then bring it back. And then they would bring, they're like, maybe tomorrow night we'll do it. Yeah. So,
there's like USPS.
Yeah, exactly. We won't. Yeah. So, but all of this and what you're describing again, and this is something Don, has discovered, and it goes with Columbia Falls as well for Mark Herrick's layout, is you don't need a pile of industries to have switching action. You can take that one industry and have those specific details. Another one that comes up, Mike King and his sugar plant, and
absolutely,
and the same thing, and you can take those longer, less turnouts, and just. That's how they would do it anyway. I mean, it's cheaper for a railroad to make a longer siding than it is for them to throw 5-6 switches in at whatever the ungodly amount is per turnout. So again, a lot of different ways to enhance your operations and make it happen within that one industry. Yeah.
A perfect example for me is Alex Bogaski's farm. Was it?
Farm rail.
Farm rail layout. That's 2 switches, and it has some excellent operating. Alex is, I think, in the middle of building a new layout, and there's also a number I see on YouTube who only have 1 or 2 switches, and they provide hours of fun. For anyone listening out there who doesn't have a layout because they don't have room, there's no real excuse, because one wall at 8 feet is enough to build a switching layout that will give you hours of joy. Yep. And sometimes they're some of the detail that goes into those, they're just outstanding. So there's no excuse. Not everyone can have a double tier layout like Don, or even one the size of a switching layout of mine. But you can have lots of fun in a small area.
Doesn't have to be your last layout either. It can just be a start. It can get you in the hobby and start building some of the skills and get yourself hooked on it. And then you can add on from there. So great way to get started.
switching layouts for me and shelf layouts have really opened the door, and it's opened the door for a lot of people. And I see that every day on our HO Scale Shelf Modelers group.
I mean, I enjoyed my big layout, 15 guys, all that stuff. But I'll tell you what, now that I have this one and not that one, the maintenance is so much less. This is a lot easier to manage. And I still have we're doing just as much switching on this layout as we were on the other one. The trains are just not traveling as far to get to where they had to go. That's barely what it is. I eliminated that long run.
Well, Paul, want to thank you for coming on and sharing with Don and I the story behind the Riverbelt and the operations. And it's glad to see you sharing the layout as well. And you've got a good group, including Justin Mitchell, who we've just interviewed. Yep. And you got a good group over there in Sydney. You're active within the NMRA over there and meeting new people and getting them excited about switching and helping them out with operations. So it's great to hear from you and glad to have you back here on the show.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.